Okay, now I've loaded up a different project model, and the reason for this is that I actually now want to show you an alternative method to creating a delay penalty that is calculated through the iterations of the Monte Carlo sampling. So what I want to show you here is if we just scroll down to the bottom, I've created activity number 14. And if I just go to the general information on the tab at the bottom here, you can see that I've made it a hammock. Now this hammock is actually linked to the actual planned completion. So i.e. this is going to be the item that's articulated in a contract in the schedule. So that is a constrained date. So it is a must finish on. So this will stay static during the simulation, and it's not going to impact the actual simulated end date, because that's how we're sort of setting it up against item number 14. So you've got the interplay here at the end of the schedule, where prolongation period is what I've called number 14, is this hammock. And at the moment, you can see that there's nothing to it because this is just the deterministic. But if I was to run simulation at the moment with the step through switched on, you can see this orange bar has now been generated. And if I sort of step through, you'll see how the schedule is moving around like this. So that means that a duration is now being calculated for this hammock. So each time you get a prolongation of the actual activities, it extends the actual completion date away from the constrained planned completion date, and therefore you get the duration. Okay, so that means if I was to switch over now to my cost module and look at the delay penalty, I've set this one up a bit differently in terms of the number of columns, so please don't be completely confused by that. It's a completely different model answering a completely different question to what we normally look at. But getting back to the point of how did I create the delay penalty, this item here, the column called frequency, is actually referencing the number of days that is on that hammock. So if I do step through, you can see we've got 349 days, we've got 130 days, we've got 626 days, and it's simply multiplying it by what I've just called here the markup. So it's a delay penalty of $10,000 per day. So every time I step through, it's going to generate that there. The reason it's in negatives, I've done that on purpose, again, because the model, I needed it to operate in a different way to work out a disallowable cost versus an allowable cost. So it's just the way that I've set my formulas up elsewhere in the model. So that's nothing to be too concerned about. But if I go to formulas, you can see it's a very simple formula. So it's literally take the prolongation, so that the symbol here is prolongation, yeah, and so you can see that it's been linked to activity 14, which is the hammock, and there is the duration 378 days, and you can see it up here 378 days. So it's literally just referencing a single piece of information and then being multiplied by a static value that is, say, listed in a contract, so it's not going to change. Sometimes you might want to have that as a variable in its own right, like we saw in the previous examples, but in this example it's just a static $10,000 per day, and every time I do that, that value changes and multiplies it accordingly. So that's an alternative way of looking at a delay penalty calculation, which is effectively an if statement: if this, then that. And we can find it down here on our distribution graph. So I can click on prolongation period for the hammock activity ID 14. So you can see it's got a finish date, start date, duration, and if it was resource loaded, you'd see the costs in here, I suppose. But because we've used this method from the cost module, we have to switch it over. And if I go to my profit loss calculation section, we can find all of the relevant costs. But there's the bit there from the disallowable penalties. So that's my 10,000 per day penalty. So you can see that it actually kind of operates in reverse because I'm using these negative numbers. So that might take a little bit of getting used to, seeing the graph go kind of backwards, but the principles are all still the same. So that was another way of doing delay penalties in Safran Risk. And what's coming up next is just a short discussion on the distribution graph and how you might want to change some of the aesthetics on that and play around with some of the settings in there.